The perfect facade Elena Rosewood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of their penthouse, watching the city lights blur through the rain. 23 floors below, Seattle pulsed with life, but up here in their glass tower, everything felt impossibly still. She pressed her palm against the cool glass, leaving a temporary mark that would fade within minutes, much like her presence in this marriage, she thought. "Mrs. Rosewood?" The housekeeper's voice broke through her reverie. Mr. Rosewood called. "He won't be home for dinner again tonight. Board meeting ran late." Elena nodded without turning around. Another board meeting. Another late night. Another lie wrapped in corporate speak. She'd stopped counting how many times Marcus had used work as his alibi, but her photographer's eye for detail had started noticing other things. Lipstick shades on his collar that weren't hers. Unfamiliar perfume lingering in his car. And the way his phone had suddenly become password protected after 5 years of marriage. The confirmation had come 3 weeks ago, not through confrontation or detective work, but through a simple accident. Marcus had left his laptop open while showering, and a notification had popped up, a photo message from someone named Vivian Cross. The image showed a young woman with platinum blonde hair and surgically enhanced features, posing in what was clearly their vacation home in the Hamptons. The same house where Elena had spent countless quiet weekends, believing she was sharing sacred space with her husband. Vivian Cross, 24 years old, 2 million followers on social media, self-proclaimed lifestyle influencer and entrepreneur. Elena had spent hours studying her online presence with the same methodical approach she once used for her photography projects before marriage consumed her creative energy. Vivian's content was a carefully curated fantasy of luxury handbags, expensive restaurants, and cryptic posts about deserving better and knowing your worth. What struck Elena most wasn't the betrayal itself, but how thoroughly ordinary it all was. The older, successful man trading his accomplished wife for a younger model who validated his ego through public worship. The mistress who believed she was special, destined for a fairy tale ending, blind to the pattern she was perpetuating. The wife expected to rage, cry, fight for scraps of attention, or quietly disappear into bitterness. But Elena had never been ordinary, even when she'd tried to be. Before becoming Marcus Rowe's wife, she had been Elena Martinez, award-winning photojournalist whose work had graced the covers of National Geographic and Time magazine. She'd documented stories of resilience in war zones, captured the quiet dignity of forgotten communities, and built a reputation for finding truth in shadows. Marriage to Marcus had seemed like a natural evolution, 2 successful people building something together. Instead, it had been a gradual erasure, each year of their marriage making her smaller, quieter, more decorative. Now, standing in their pristine home that felt more like a museum than a sanctuary, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't confront Marcus. She wouldn't demand explanations or fight for a marriage that had already ended. She wouldn't give Vivian Cross the satisfaction of a public spectacle or the validation of being seen as a threat worth battling. Instead, she would do what she had always done best: observe, document, and reveal truth through her art. Elena walked to her old photography equipment, stored in boxes since their wedding. Her fingers traced the familiar weight of her camera, and for the first time in months, she smiled. Marcus and Vivian thought they were writing her ending, but they had no idea she was about to begin her masterpiece. The gathering storm, the coffee shop on Pine Street, buzzed with the familiar energy of freelancers and students, their laptops creating a mosaic of glowing screens against weathered wooden tables. Elena chose a corner booth, her back to the wall, an old habit from her photojournalism days. She traded her usual designer clothes for jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger. Less recognizable as Marcus Rosewood's polished wife, David Chun arrived. Exactly on time, sliding into the seat across from her with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. At 35, he carried himself with the quiet intensity Elena remembered from their journalism school days, though silver now threaded through his black hair and laugh lines marked the corners of his dark eyes. "Elena Martinez," he said, using her maiden name deliberately. "I have to admit, when you reached out after 5 years of radio silence, I was curious." "I need your help with something," she said, cutting straight to the point. "But first, I need your word that this conversation stays between us until I say otherwise." David leaned back, studying her face with the same analytical gaze that had made him one of Seattle's most respected investigative reporters. "You're married to one of the most powerful men in tech. Whatever this is about, it's big." Elena opened her laptop and turned it toward him. The screen displayed a carefully organized digital folder labeled Project Icarus, dozens of screenshots, photos, financial records, and timeline documents she'd been compiling for weeks. "Marcus is having an affair with Vivian Cross, but that's just the surface." She clicked through the files methodically. "Look at this, her follower growth correlates exactly with Marcus's company announcements. Her sponsored content features products from companies that just happen to be courting Rosewood Industries for partnerships. She's not just sleeping with my husband. She's leveraging their relationship for business advantage." David scrolled through the evidence, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. "This is corporate influence peddling disguised as social media marketing. If she's using insider information, ... there's more." Elena pulled up a series of bank transfers. Marcus has been funneling money through shell companies to pay for her lifestyle. Designer clothes, luxury trips, even her apartment rent. It's not just an affair, it's financial fraud. "How did you get access to all this?" Elena's smile was razor thin. "People forget that I built my career investigating stories everyone else missed. Marcus never changed his passwords after we married, and he's surprisingly careless with his digital footprint when he thinks no one is watching." David closed the laptop and looked at her directly. "What do you want from me? A story?" "Because this would destroy him. I don't want a traditional expose. I want something bigger." Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I want to create a multimedia investigation that explores the entire ecosystem. How powerful men use their influence to elevate women who stroke their egos. How those women exploit other women to climb social ladders, and how wives are expected to suffer in silence while everyone profits from their humiliation." "You're talking about a documentary series." "I'm talking about changing the conversation entirely. Not just about Marcus and Vivian, but about the whole system that creates these situations." Elena's eyes blazed with the passion David remembered from their college days. "I want to give a voice to every woman who's been erased by her husband's success. Every wife who's been replaced by a younger model. Every woman who's been told her worth is tied to her ability to stay silent." Meanwhile, across town in a trendy yoga studio, Vivian Cross posed for her phone camera, capturing the perfect shot of her reflection in floor-to-ceiling mirrors. Her followers ate up these candid moments of her supposedly balanced lifestyle, never knowing that she'd taken 47 photos to get this one casual-looking image. "Another amazing session with my favorite instructor," she typed, adding heart emojis and tagging the exclusive studio that had comped her membership in exchange for promotion. The engagement came immediately, hundreds of likes, dozens of comments, from women praising her dedication and asking about her workout routine. What they didn't know was that Vivian had spent the actual class time in the lobby, scrolling through Marcus's text messages on his secondary phone that he'd forgotten in her purse. She'd developed a system for monitoring his communications partly out of paranoia and partly out of strategic planning. Alana's name appeared occasionally in mundane exchanges about household schedules, but there was something different in the recent messages at distance, a formality that hadn't been there before. Vivian wasn't worried about Elena Rosewood. The woman was a ghost in her own marriage, so thoroughly diminished that Marcus barely mentioned her anymore. Still, Vivian had learned to pay attention to details, and Elena's increasing absence from social events had not gone unnoticed. Other wives in their circle whispered about depression, about Elena not handling the pressure well, about how difficult it must be to live in Marcus's shadow. The thought made Vivian smile. Some women were built for visibility, for claiming their place in the spotlight. Others were meant to fade into the background, casualties of their own inability to evolve with their circumstances. Elena Rosewood was clearly the latter, and Vivian felt no guilt about stepping into the space the older woman was too weak to occupy. Back at the coffee shop, Elena and David finalized their plans. They would work together to create something. Unprecedented investigation that would expose not just individual bad actors, but the entire cultural machine that enabled them. One more thing, Elena said as they prepared to leave. When this goes public, I want my name on it. Not as Marcus Rowe's wife, but as Elena Martinez, journalist. It's time I stopped hiding behind someone else's identity. David nodded, recognizing the transformation happening before his eyes. The woman across from him was no longer the diminished wife he'd heard about in industry circles. She was the fierce journalist he'd once known, awakened from a 5-year hibernation and hungry for truth. Neither of them noticed Vivian Cross's assistant, seated 3 tables away, photographing their meeting for her boss's ever-expanding surveillance operation. The web unravels 3 months later. Elena sat in the converted garage behind her sister's house in Capitol Hill, surrounded by editing equipment she'd acquired piece by piece. The space bore no resemblance to the sterile perfection of the Rosewood. Penthouse cables snaked across the concrete floor. Empty coffee cups formed precarious towers on makeshift desks, and the walls were covered with photographs, timeline charts, and interview transcripts that mapped out her investigation, like a complex constellation. Shadows Behind Success had launched quietly on a Tuesday morning with minimal fanfare. Elena, using the pseudonym E.M. Stone, had spent weeks perfecting the first episode's audio mix, ensuring her voice was disguised just enough to maintain anonymity while preserving the emotional authenticity that made her storytelling compelling. The premise was deceptively simple. A deep dive into the hidden power dynamics within Seattle's tech elite, focusing on how successful men leveraged their influence to elevate mistresses while systematically diminishing their wives. But Elena's approach was revolutionary. Instead of sensationalized gossip, she presented meticulously researched exposes that revealed patterns of financial manipulation, emotional abuse, and social engineering that transcended any single relationship. By the 3rd episode, download numbers had exploded. The podcast reached #1 on Apple's investigative journalism charts, spawning discussion threads across Reddit, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tech wives began reaching out anonymously, sharing stories that painted a disturbing picture of systematic erasure disguised as marital evolution. David had initially worried about Elena's emotional proximity to the subject matter, but her work demonstrated the precision and objectivity that had made her reputation as a photojournalist. She interviewed psychologists about narcissistic abuse patterns, financial experts about asset manipulation, and legal specialists about the intersection of adultery and corporate malfeasance. The personal vendetta was buried beneath layers of rigorous journalism that no one could dismiss as mere revenge. Marcus first learned about the podcast during a board meeting, when his CFO mentioned the fascinating series about tech industry power dynamics that his wife had been discussing at dinner parties. The description made something cold subtle in Marcus's stomach, but he dismissed the paranoia as guilt manifesting in unexpected ways. Elena, meanwhile, had become completely invisible in their shared spaces. She attended required social functions, like a ghost, smiling politely and deflecting questions about her absence from various charitable committees with vague references to personal projects. Marcus found her compliance almost eerie. No accusations, no demands for explanation, no attempts to compete with Vivian for his attention. He told himself this proved their marriage had simply run its natural course, that Elena understood the relationship had evolved beyond romantic attachment. What he didn't realize was that Elena's silence had become weaponized observation. Every conversation, every phone call, every careless comment became material for her investigation. She documented his patterns with scientific precision. How he manipulated conversations to avoid accountability. How he used his professional reputation to silence criticism. How he leveraged other people's insecurities to maintain control. The breakthrough came in episode 6, titled The Influencer Industrial Complex. Elena had spent weeks analyzing the financial ecosystem surrounding social media personalities who dated powerful men, revealing how these relationships functioned as elaborate money laundering schemes disguised as lifestyle inspiration. She dissected anonymous case studies, a tech executive who funneled marketing budgets to his girlfriend's consulting company, a venture capitalist who used startup connections to secure brand partnerships for his mistress, and most damning of all, a media mogul who manipulated stock prices through strategic information sharing with his social media influencer girlfriend. Episode included audio recordings obtained through legal means that Elena's legal team had verified extensively of conversations between the influencer and her assistant, discussing how to leverage insider information for maximum profit. Vivian's voice, artificially distorted but recognizably hers to anyone who knew her personally, discussed manipulating Marcus's emotions to gain access to confidential business deals. "He's so desperate to impress me that he tells me everything," the voice said, laughing. "Yesterday, he showed me the acquisition documents just to prove how important he is. Like, I already know you're rich, dummy. Just tell me which companies to invest in." The recording continued with Vivian describing Elena in terms so cruel and dismissive that even Elena, who had steeled herself for the worst, felt genuinely shocked. The wife is pathetic. Like, genuinely sad to watch. She just sits there at events like a decorative plant, smiling and nodding while everyone pities her. I'm honestly doing her a favor by taking him off her hands. She obviously can't handle being married to someone that successful. The episode went viral within hours. #Shadows Behind Success trended globally as women shared their own experiences with financial manipulation and emotional erasure. Tech journalists began connecting the dots, realizing that several high-profile relationships they'd covered as romantic fairy tales were actually elaborate fraud schemes. Vivian first learned about her exposure when her phone exploded with notifications, hundreds of DMs, tagged posts, and news alerts that mentioned her name alongside terms like fraud, manipulation, and investigation. Her carefully curated image began crumbling in real time as followers analyzed her past posts with new context, identifying inconsistencies in her story and evidence of the calculated deception Elena had exposed. Brand partnerships evaporated. Overnight, her talent agency dropped her via email. The luxury apartment that Marcus had been secretly paying for suddenly required her to prove independent income, which she couldn't do without exposing the illegal financial arrangements that had funded her lifestyle. Marcus, meanwhile, faced a different kind of reckoning. Rosewood Industries' board demanded explanations for the financial irregularities that Elena's investigation had uncovered. SEC investigators opened a formal inquiry into potential securities fraud. His professional reputation, built over 15 Years of careful image management began dissolving as former colleagues distanced themselves from the scandal, but the most devastating revelation was yet to come. Elena had saved her masterpiece for episode 7, a comprehensive timeline proving that Marcus had been manipulating Elena's antidepressant medication, increasing her doses without her knowledge to keep her compliant and docile while he restructured their shared assets to his advantage. As Seattle's tech community reeled from the implications, Elena sat in her garage studio, preparing for the final episode that would reveal her identity and transform her from anonymous investigator to public advocate. The game was nearly over, and Marcus was just beginning to understand that he'd never been playing against Vivian's ambition or Elena's heartbreak. He'd been playing against Elena's intelligence, and he'd already lost. The reckoning. The Seattle Convention Center's main auditorium buzzed with anticipation as over 2,000 attendees settled into their seats for what had been billed as a special live recording of Shadows Behind Success. Tech journalists, industry executives, and women's rights advocates filled the space, creating an electric atmosphere that felt more like a rock concert than a podcast taping. Elena stood backstage, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. She wore a simple black dress, elegant but not expensive, professional but not intimidating. For the first time in months, she looked like herself rather than a shadow of Marcus Rowe's wife. David appeared beside her, holding 2 wireless microphones. "You ready for this?" "I've been ready for this my entire life," Elena replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had finally found her purpose again. "I just forgot for a while." The moderator, renowned journalist Sarah Chun, David's sister, who had jumped at the chance to facilitate this revelation, took the stage to thunderous applause. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the past 4 months, you've been listening to the voice of E.M. Stone, the anonymous investigator behind Shadows Behind Success. Tonight, for the first time, she's ready to step into the light and tell her own story." Elena walked onto the stage, and the recognition rippled through the audience like a shockwave. Gasps echoed through the auditorium as Seattle's tech elite realized that the unassuming wife they dismissed and overlooked had been the architect of their industry's most devastating expose. "My name is Elena Martinez Rosewood," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "And for the past 5 years, I've been living as a ghost in my own life." The live stream numbers climbed rapidly. 500,000 viewers, then 800,000, as news of Elena's identity reveal spread across social media. In corporate boardrooms, law offices, and luxury apartments throughout the city, people stopped what they were doing to watch the woman they thought they knew transform into someone entirely different. Elena's presentation was masterfully structured, beginning with her personal story, but quickly expanding to encompass the systemic issues her investigation had uncovered. She presented financial evidence, psychological research, and legal analysis with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor, building an unassailable case against not just individual bad actors, but the entire cultural framework that enabled them. The question isn't why Marcus Rosewood chose to have an affair, Elena explained, clicking through slides that showed the intricate web of financial manipulation she'd uncovered. The question is why our society has created a system where powerful men can systematically erase their wives' identities, transfer marital assets to their mistresses, and manipulate medication to maintain control, all while being celebrated as successful leaders. In his downtown office, Marcus watched the live stream with growing horror. His legal team sat around the conference table like mourners at a funeral, occasionally exchanging glances that communicated their shared understanding. This was career-ending, marriage-ending, potentially freedom-ending territory. "She recorded everything," his attorney murmured, reviewing the evidence Elena was presenting in real time. Phone calls, private conversations, financial transactions. It's all admissible, and it's all damning. Marcus's phone buzzed constantly, with calls from board members, investors, and journalists, but he ignored them all. He was transfixed by the woman on screen, someone he'd lived with for 5 years, but apparently never known at all. This Elena was articulate, commanding, brilliant in ways that made his chest tight with something that might have been regret if he'd been capable of that level of self-reflection. Meanwhile, across town in her rapidly emptying apartment, Vivian Cross watched her life disintegrate in real time. Her social media accounts hemorrhaged followers by the thousands as the audience realized they'd been consuming content funded by embezzled money and insider trading. Comment sections filled with angry messages from people who felt betrayed by her manufactured authenticity. The brands that had once courted her partnership now issued statements distancing themselves from her activities. Her talent agency released a terse announcement terminating their relationship, effective immediately. Even the yoga studio she'd used for content creation posted a statement clarifying that they'd never had a formal partnership agreement and had been unaware of her fraudulent income sources. But the most devastating blow came when her assistant, the young woman who'd been photographing Alana and David's meetings, testified live via video link about Vivian's instructions to gather intelligence on potential threats to her relationship with Marcus. She had me follow Mrs. Rosewood to appointments, photograph her with other people, even go through her social media looking for signs of suspicious activity, the assistant explained her, voice shaking with nerves, but clear in its honesty. She was obsessed with proving that Mrs. Rosewood was cheating or unstable, so she could use that information to secure her position with Mr. Rosewood. Elena's response to this revelation was measured but pointed. This surveillance represents the logical endpoint of a system that treats women as competitors for male resources, rather than individuals with inherent worth. Vivian Cross wasn't born manipulative. She was responding rationally to incentives that rewarded her for diminishing other women. The audience erupted in applause, but Elena raised her hand for silence. Which brings me to the most important point of tonight's presentation. This isn't about individual accountability. It's about systemic change. She clicked to her final slide, which outlined the Elena Martinez Foundation for Financial Justice, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing legal and financial assistance to women experiencing economic abuse in high-net-worth marriages. Starting Monday, we'll be offering free legal consultations, forensic accounting services, and media strategy support to any woman who needs help uncovering and prosecuting financial manipulation by their spouse. Elena announced, because the goal was never revenge, it was justice, transparency, and creating a future where no woman has to choose between her safety and her silence. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Elena stood at the podium, no longer invisible, no longer diminished, no longer afraid. She had spent 5 years shrinking herself to fit into Marcus's world, but tonight she had reclaimed her space and expanded it to include every woman who'd ever been erased by someone else's ambition. As the applause finally died down, Sarah Chun asked the question everyone was thinking. What's next for you personally, Elena? Elena smiled, the first genuine smile she'd managed in months. I'm getting divorced, obviously. I'm starting a foundation. I'm returning to photojournalism. And I'm probably going to fall in love again, but this time with someone who sees my success as additive to his own rather than threatening to it. In the audience, David Chun smiled back, understanding exactly what she meant. The reckoning was complete, but Elena's story was just beginning. The new dawn 6 months later, Elena stood in the sunlit offices of Martinez Media Collective, watching her team of 12 investigative journalists collaborate on her latest expose. The converted warehouse in Georgetown buzzed with purposeful energy a stark contrast to the sterile silence of her former life. Awards from the Society of Professional Journalists and the Polk Foundation already decorated the exposed brick walls, recognition for the cultural shift her work had catalyzed. The Hoffman Industries piece is ready for your review. Call Jennifer Walsh, a former corporate lawyer who joined Elena's team after her own divorce from a tech executive. The foundation had evolved beyond its original scope, becoming a full-service media organization that specialized in investigating financial abuse while providing direct support to victims. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dinner tonight? I have news about the book deal." Their relationship had developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared purpose, rather than the desperate need for validation that had characterized her marriage to Marcus. David understood her work schedule, celebrated her successes without trying to claim credit, and never once suggested she was too intense about pursuing justice. The final statistics from her investigation painted a comprehensive picture of success. Marcus had pleaded guilty to securities fraud and tax evasion, receiving a 3-year sentence and permanent ban from serving as a corporate officer. Rosewood Industries had collapsed within months, its stock price cratering as the full extent of the financial manipulation became public knowledge. Vivian Cross had fled Seattle entirely, though Elena occasionally received updates about her attempts to rebrand herself as a reformed influencer, speaking about authentic living. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but Elena felt no satisfaction in Vivian's continued struggles. The younger woman had been both perpetrator and victim, trapped in a system that rewarded her for diminishing other women while ultimately destroying her own authenticity. More importantly, Elena's work had inspired legislative changes. Washington State had passed the Elena Martinez Act, requiring enhanced financial disclosure in high-asset divorce proceedings and creating criminal penalties for medication tampering in domestic relationships. 3 other states were considering similar legislation. The foundation's impact extended beyond individual cases. Elena's team had trained over 200 attorneys in recognizing signs of financial abuse, created resource guides translated into 12 languages, and established a network of forensic accountants who provided services at reduced rates for victims of economic manipulation. "Elena?" Jennifer appeared in her doorway, holding a thick legal document. The final divorce decree came through. "You're officially Elena Martinez again, legally speaking." Elena accepted the papers with steady hands, feeling lighter as she signed. Her new name. Marcus's attorneys had initially tried to fight the asset division, but the evidence of his fraud had made their position untenable. Elena had walked away with enough money to fund her foundation indefinitely, plus ownership of several properties that she'd immediately converted into transitional housing for women escaping financially abusive relationships. That evening, she met David at their favorite restaurant, a small Ethiopian place in the International District that bore no resemblance to the pretentious establishments she'd frequented as Marcus's wife. Over dinner, he shared news that his book about their investigation had been optioned for a limited series, with Elena maintaining creative control and executive producer credit. "I want to make sure it focuses on the systemic issues rather than the personal drama," Elena said, reviewing the contract terms. "The goal is education, not entertainment." "That's exactly why you're the right person to tell this story," David replied, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "You never lost sight of the bigger picture, even when it would have been easier to make it about revenge." As they walked home through the quiet streets of Capitol Hill, Elena reflected on the transformation of the past year. She'd begun as a woman so diminished she'd forgotten her own name, and emerged as someone who changed laws, influenced policy, and created lasting institutional change. Her phone buzzed with a message from a woman in Portland whose husband had been arrested for financial fraud after reading Elena's guide to recognizing economic abuse. Another victory, another life reclaimed. Another woman who would never have to choose between safety and silence. Elena Martinez, no longer Rosewood. Never again Invisible smiled as she unlocked the door to her modest apartment. Tomorrow would bring new investigations, new challenges, new opportunities to transform personal pain into collective power. She'd finally learned the difference between being seen and being valued, between being supported and being diminished, between love that lifts and love that erases. The woman who'd once stood at penthouse windows, feeling like a ghost, now stood firmly in her own light, casting shadows that protected others rather than hiding in shadows cast by someone else's success. The new dawn had arrived, and Elena Martinez was wide awake to meet it.